Welcome to the Hilleberg Helags, a roomy, lightweight, 3-season tunnel tent with 2 entrances and 2 vestibules. Available in a 2- and 3-person version, the Helags, like all Hilleberg tents, has linked but separable inner and outer tents for either simultaneous pitching or separate use. The Helags has plenty of ventilation built into its design, with curved patterning on the outer tent walls and full mesh inner tent doors for constant airflow. Included with the Helags are the tent bag, the tent with attached skylines and line runners, a pole bag, 3 poles, 1 spare pole section with a repair sleeve, a peg bag with 16 pegs, and an instruction book. Other accessories available for purchase include pole holders for pitching the inner tent separately, a footprint for the inner tent area, a mesh inner tent, tarps and trekking poles, as well as extra pegs, skyline, line runners, and reflective cord. This video covers everything you need to know about pitching the Helags. We recommend that you carefully look over the instruction booklet included with the tent and that you practice pitching and using your tent before your first backcountry trip. Pitching the Helags. Find a level spot that is free of stones and other sharp objects and lay out the tent. If it's windy, it's a good idea to peg out 1 guy line so the tent doesn't blow away. Lay out the tent's poles, noting that they are not all the same length. There are 2 shorter poles and 1 longer one. The longer pole, which goes into the tent's middle pole sleeve, is marked with red tape, which corresponds to the red webbing strip on the middle pole sleeve. For maximum longevity and durability of your tent poles, it's important that you're careful with them. Make sure that each segment is seated properly so that the segments don't drift apart while pitching the tent. A small gap can lead to pole breakage. Insert one of the shorter, unmarked poles approximately halfway into one of the pole sleeves on either end of the tent. Grip the pole and pull the pole sleeve until the pole end is properly seated in the closed end of the pole sleeve. While holding the pole sleeve, push the pole to arch it fully into the sleeve and put the end of the pole into the pole holder cap. Tighten the pole tensioner, making sure the tensioner is tightened completely. Repeat this process with the other 2 poles, putting the longer pole marked with red tape into the middle pole sleeve with the red webbing strip and the remaining shorter pole into the sleeve at the other end of the tent. Set the adjustable peg tensioners on the corners of the vestibules to their longest and peg down one end of the tent. Angle the pegs at about a 45-degree angle to the ground and press them in. Use a rock to press or pound them in if necessary, until only the very top of the peg is barely visible. Avoid stepping on the pegs to press them into the ground, as this can bend them. Using the peg tensioners on the other vestibule, pull out the tent, make sure it's straight, and peg down the end. Tighten all 4 peg tensioners to make the tent taut. With just these 4 peg points, you should have a perfect pitch for the nicely stretched roofline. The tent is now fully set up and ready for use, but we do recommend that you peg the sides of the tent and all guy lines, since weather conditions can change unexpectedly. Guy lines work best when used at their longest length possible. Place the guy lines as shown here to provide the greatest stability and best structure. When tensioning the guy lines, don't tighten the line runners so much that they deform the poles. Doing so can weaken the structure of the tent and can cause pole breakage. Once you've pegged the sides and the guy lines, it's a good idea to double check that the pegs are in the ground completely and that the poles, peg tensioners, and guy lines are all correctly adjusted. Using the Helags. Both Helags vestibule entrances can be rolled away and secured at 3 different points with attached elastic loops and toggles. The red toggle at the base of the Helags vestibule entrance zipper can be inserted into the zipper pull to lock the zipper in windy conditions. For basic use, roll the door and secure it using the first elastic loop and toggle. For more airflow, unpeg the corner of the vestibule and roll and secure the door using the second loop and toggle. For maximum ventilation and views, unpeg the other corner and roll the entire vestibule aside and secure it with the 2 toggles along the pole sleeve. If you're going to use either of the last 2 options, it's a good idea to move the front guy lines so that they're nearly in line with the wall of the tent. In the inner tent, both tent doors can be rolled to the side and secured with an attached elastic loop and toggle. Don't let the door panels drag on the ground and don't step on them, as dirt and sand will shorten the lifespan of the zipper. The inner tent has 2 pockets as well as a clothesline. Avoid overloading the pockets or the clothesline, as this can pull on the inner tent and decrease its performance. Tips for using your Helags in very wet conditions. When it's raining hard, you can reach under the outer tent and disconnect the inner tent from the outer tent using the loop and toggles. This helps create more dry space to deal with wet gear before going into the inner tent. To minimize the rain coming into the expanded vestibule space you've created, unzip the door only about halfway and crawl in. If it's raining hard when you're going to take down your Helags, you can remove the inner tent first and stow it separately in your pack. Of course, do this with the doors closed. If doing this, you can set up the outer tent first and then reattach the dry inner tent. Using the Helags outer tent separately. Using the outer tent on its own provides a great place for people to gather. Simply detach the inner tent from the outer tent and pitch the outer tent as you would the complete tent. You can also pitch the complete tent and then detach the inner by starting at one of the inside corners and disconnecting the inner tent's toggles from the outer tent's rings. If you're planning to reattach the inner tent, you can leave one of the toggles in place and tuck the inner tent into the corner to make reattaching it easier. Using the Helags Inner tent separately. Pitched on its own, the Helags Inner tent provides excellent lightweight, warm weather bug protection. To use the inner tent separately, you will need 6 pole holders, which are available for purchase separately. The poles from your Helags, 10 pegs, and 4 lengths of guy line, approximately 2 meters in length. While you can use some of the guy lines from your tent, we do recommend that you bring extra. And if you plan to use your inner tent on its own regularly, creating dedicated inner tent pitching guy lines with line runners is a good idea. Disconnect the inner tent from the outer tent, then lay the inner tent out and connect the pole holders to the 6 toggles around the perimeter of the tent's floor. Thread one of the shorter poles through the line of elastic loops on one end of the inner tent and put the pole end into the pole holder at the end of the loops. Holding on to the free pole holder, arch the pole and place the other end of the pole into it. Repeat this process with the longer pole, which is marked with red tape, inserting it through the line of elastic loops at the center of the tent. Lastly, put in the remaining shorter pole at the other end. Peg the 2 pole holders at one end of the tent, remembering to press the pegs in completely at about a 45-degree angle to the ground. Pull the tent taut and peg the 2 pole holders at the other end. Tie on one length of guy line about 3/4 of the way up each side of one of the poles on one end of the tent, then pull them out at a slight angle and peg them down. Repeat this process on the other end of the tent. Adjust the guy lines as needed with either a line runner or an adjustable knot. Lastly, peg down the 2 pole holders at the middle of each side of the tent. Using the optional Kaitum Helags Mesh Inner Tent. The Kaitum Helags Mesh Inner Tent can be used on its own or in place of the regular inner tent. Simply detach the standard inner tent from the outer tent and toggle the mesh inner tent in its place. Please note that the mesh inner tent weighs about the same as the corresponding model's standard inner tent. To use the mesh inner tent separately, you will need 10 pegs as well as the poles for the appropriate size Kaitum Helags Mesh Inner that you have. For more information about specific pole sizes, see our website. The Kaitum Helags Mesh Inner Tent comes with 6 pole holders and 4 adjustable guy lines with line runners. Setting up the mesh inner tent is done exactly the same way as when you set up the regular inner tent separately, so if you just watched that, you can skip ahead if you want. Lay the mesh inner tent out and make sure the pole holders are connected to the 6 toggles around the perimeter of the tent's floor. Thread one of the shorter poles through the line of elastic loops on one end of the inner tent and put the pole end into the pole holder at the end of the loops. Holding on to the free pole holder, arch the pole and place the other end of the pole into it. Repeat this process with a longer pole, which is marked with red tape, inserting it through the line of elastic loops at the center of the tent. Lastly, thread the remaining shorter pole at the other end. Peg the 2 pole holders at one end of the tent, remembering to press the pegs in completely at about a 45-degree angle to the ground. Pull the tent taut and peg the 2 pole holders at the other end. With a girth hitch, attach the fixed loop of one length of guy line about 3/4 of the way up each side of one of the poles on one end of the tent. Pull them out at a slight angle and peg them down in the line runner adjustable loops. Repeat this process on the other end of the tent. Adjust the line runners on the guy lines as needed. Lastly, peg down the 2 pole holders at the middle of each side of the tent. You can augment your Helags Mesh Inner Tent with a Hilleberg Tarp 10. This combination is an excellent solution for warm weather use, with the mesh inner offering fully ventilated bug protection and the tarp providing protection from rain or sun. Drape the Tarp 10 over the Helags Mesh Inner Tent or regular inner tent, with the tarp's longer dimension parallel to the sides of the inner tent and center it both length and widthwise. Make sure the tarp is placed so its integrated pocket is facing the ground. Pull out all of the guy lines except for the two in the middle of the short ends of the tarp, the ones that are positioned over the center of the inner tent doors, and peg them down, but leave the lines themselves fairly slack. Set a trekking pole so it's a little bit longer than the height of the Helags mesh inner tent. Put the pole's tips into the ring on the tarp that's in front of one of the tent's doors, then peg down and tighten the guy line. For easiest adjustment of the guy line, place the guy line loop behind the tip of the trekking pole and then tension the line runner. Repeat with another trekking pole at the other end of the tent. Tighten the other guy lines and adjust their peg points as needed to get the setup and coverage you want. Using the Helags Footprint. Please note that the Helags Footprint only covers the area of the inner tent. The best time to attach the footprint to your tent is before you go outdoors. Lay your tent out with the floor side up and arrange the footprint on top of the tent floor with the logo side towards the floor. Attach the 6 red toggles around the perimeter of the footprint to the corresponding rings where the inner tent connects to the bottom of the Helags outer tent. You can leave the footprint attached when you pack away the tent. Taking down the Helags. When taking down the tent, repeat every step you used to pitch the tent, but in reverse. In windy conditions, it's a good idea to leave one guy line pegged down when removing the pegs and poles. We recommend that you set both the peg tensioners and all the guy lines to their longest length before taking down and packing the tent. Also, make sure that all the doors are closed. That way, the tent will be fully ready for the next time you pitch it. To remove a pole, loosen the pole tensioner, then push the pole out from the other end while holding on to the pole sleeve. Never pull a pole out of the sleeve. Repeat with the remaining poles and put the poles into the pole bag. When folding the poles, check to see if they've been damaged. If so, replace the damaged section with the repair pole section. Make sure you have all the pegs and put them into the peg bag, and put the peg bag into the pole bag. There are 2 options for packing your Helags into its bag: stuffing or folding and rolling. If you choose to stuff your tent, make sure to stow the poles and pegs in your pack separate from the tent bag. Never stuff the poles down the side of the tent in the tent bag. If you decide to fold and roll your tent, we recommend that you fold the tent so that the floor is left facing outward. Roll the pole bag into the tent before you put the entire bundle into the tent bag. Don't ever store a wet tent. As soon as possible, hang your tent to dry. If you have the space, the ideal way is to put the poles in and hang the complete tent. If you've attached the optional footprint, make sure and detach one corner so the tent floor and the footprint dry properly. Clean off and dry the pegs and inspect them for any damage. Have a wonderful outing and enjoy the wilderness, but leave as small an imprint as possible. Leave everything the way you would like to find it on your next trip. Visit Hilleberg.com to see our entire product range and to find more videos with practical tips on using your tent. You can also read more about us, including our history, our philosophy, and how we make our tents.